Download the free Times Radio app from the App Store or Google Play today.
Early breakfast on Times Radio with Elevon. Make the move to Elevon today. Visit elevon.co.uk.
Times Radio Early Breakfast. Tom Nunan here sitting in for Rosie Wright. It's time to go through the morning's papers, and here to do that with me is the journalist, the barrister, the broadcaster, Andrew Eborn. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Always a delight to join you.
Absolutely lovely to have you with us. Let's focus first on the front page of the Times. Trump, I will try to get Ukraine some land back. We're heading towards this Friday meeting, and frankly, we can only watch and wait. How do you feel about it? I'm always struck when I speak to people about the news. As a journalist, you're sort of trying to take listeners' opinions in, how strongly people feel about the war in Ukraine, how invested they are in a foreign war, essentially. How do you feel going into Friday?
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, Trump's territorial trade talk is basically what it is. And Trump is an extraordinary man. I mean, he's the poster boy for lots of the stories that we have and the way that he's dictating the narrative around the world. The summit in Alaska is basically, he refers to it as a feel-out meeting. And it's going to be the first time that Trump and Putin have sort of sat down since 2019 when they spoke on the margins of the G20 in Osaka, you might remember. The reality is this, and I pointed this out several times, Trump is after the Nobel Peace Prize. He promised, as you pointed out earlier in the programme, that he was going to resolve all of this in 24 hours. That clearly hasn't happened. He clearly has a lot of respect. He may not agree with him, but he certainly has a lot of respect for Putin, which he certainly doesn't have for Zelenskyy, as we saw in the staged, if you like, pantomime when they had Zelenskyy in the White House and he was calling him out and you want World War III and all that sort of narrative. It's going to be very interesting what's happening, but it does seem as though a territorial trade does seem inevitable.
Very interesting, and we'll keep covering it throughout the week on Times Radio. In the Times, on the domestic politics section, ministers are going to they're preparing to relax nuclear safety rules, saying we're too risk-averse about nuclear power stations. We need to cut costs, push through the bureaucracy and get building them. Would you be happy living near a nuclear power plant, or if the government came along and said, we're going to build one near your home?
Well, I think as deliriously happy as you would be, Tom. The nuclear's due nudge. Safe stations are a risky rush. It's interesting, isn't it? Because under current rules, reactors must be designed so that even in the event of a meltdown, the radiation released will be no greater than natural background levels found in Cornwall. And looking at the brilliant Times article today, they say this is an event with a likelihood of occurring once in a million years. The thing is this, it's fear, isn't it? And everybody fears. Every time you talk about nuclear reactors, they think of the terrible disasters that have happened throughout history, and they assume that that's going to be the case. The reality is, with all the sort of safety measures in place, it is incredibly safe, it is incredibly clean, and saves people a lot of money. Would I like to live next door to one? It probably spoiled my view in Regent's Park, so probably the short answer is no. But I think the element of fear is much greater than it needs to be.
Yes, it's interesting that I was thinking about this question myself, and I think, I'm not sure how I would feel, but I think it's more on the basis of eyesore and a massive project going up near you rather than the specific risks of a nuclear power plant.
Yes, absolutely.
It'll be interesting to see how other people reacted to that. Of course, you can get in touch with your thoughts on anything we talk about. 87222. Start your message with the word Times, or WhatsApp us on 0333 003 2353. The Royal College of Nursing, Andrew, has done some freedom of information requests, and their research suggests that the level of abuse that nurses are facing on A&E has doubled since 2019. People spitting, people physically assaulting nurses in some cases, pointing guns at them. It seems ridiculous that is going on in hospitals. Do we need to do more to keep nurses safe? Are there things we can do to keep nurses safe?
Well, there's a number of things. Firstly, it's absolutely abhorrent that anybody should be subjected to this sort of violence. They talk about them being punched, spat at and threatened as any violence doubles. We also need to look at some of the underlying causes, and some of the underlying causes about frustration, about getting appointments through the NHS, getting service and so on and so forth. And there's increasing frustration about that, which is leading to this sort of side. But it's as I say, it's absolutely abhorrent that anybody should be subjected to this sort of treatment, and things need to be done to protect the staff, but also, as I say, to deal with the fundamental causes. I was looking at the stats for this, and of the 89 hospital trusts that responded, there were 4,054 cases of physical violence against A&E staff in 2024, and that was up from 2,093 in 2019, so almost double on that sort of basis. And she basically said there was a senior A&E nurse in London who told the RCN that she'd seen fellow nurses punched and kicked. This needs to be called out. Appropriate steps need to be taken. And as I say, also look at the underlying causes.
Maybe the underlying causes will alleviate some of that. It seems to me that it's such a disproportionate response, whether, proportionally bringing down waiting lists and trying to make people feel happier with their NHS service will stop people reacting quite so bizarrely and abhorrently towards nurses. There's a piece in the Times, an interview with comments by the Nobel Prize winning author Abdulrazak Gurna, saying that he can't read the work of authors who he previously really admired, but now says are nasty is the word he uses. He picks out particularly Savias Naipaul, who he says is a racist, and says that it was rereading Naipaul's work, which, again, he loved and has influenced him, but rereading that cemented his view that Naipaul is a racist. It's accompanied by an interesting piece by Robbie Millen, the Times' literary editor, that horrible men can be great writers. Can you enjoy art from artists who you don't particularly like or who you find difficult, whose views you find unacceptable?
I think the reality is this: it's either censoring classics or righting wrongs, isn't it? If you look at most of the art world, whether it's cinema, whether it's television, whether it's films, or as indeed writing. I mean, you look at Roman Polanski, you might look at Woody Allen, you might not like their behind-the-scenes activities, and so on and so forth. But the reality is, it doesn't stop you enjoying the work, or it shouldn't stop you enjoying the work. Maybe approaching it in a new light so that you can turn around and basically counteract any racist or other views that are expressed. I don't approve of censorship at all. I don't think that people should shield themselves, put themselves in cotton wool from views that they find abhorrent. They need to look at those, expose those to sunlight, because I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. If there are abhorrent views expressed, then expose those for what they are. But certainly I wouldn't ever ban something on the basis of somebody's background.
I suppose here's a slight nuance to that. It's one thing for you or I as fully grown adults to, whether it's listening to the music of Michael Jackson or I watched Rosemary's Baby for the first time. Again, you bring up Polanski. But then I saw a play recently, Giant, fantastic new play, had John Lithgow as Roald Dahl, and it focused on debates about Roald Dahl's anti-Semitism. How would you feel about reading Dahl to children, to grandchildren? Should children be exposed to that when they are not and shouldn't have to try to understand all that debate about separating art from artist and someone's abhorrent views? Do you think that you would be comfortable reading, in that example, Roald Dahl to your kids? Fantastic author, but...
As always, you make a very eloquent point, and that the reality is this: is it the material you're looking at, or is it the person who wrote that material or created that material? I think where there are views, and it's age specific, I think we don't want to cotton wool our children too much. As with most things, you need to turn around and say there are different views on the world, and we need to make sure that children understand those views and debate them and realise why those views are wrong. But if you're just talking about the creator and that the relevant prejudices or things you find abhorrent are not reflected in the work, then I don't think you should ban the work just because you don't agree with the views of the author. As regard those views, as I say, it's age specific. So I would encourage people from a very early age to question everything. If you just shield people, it's an unrealistic view of the world. But obviously people need to look at the age specific, explain things into context, get people thinking, because people don't. What happens is they all surround themselves with people who've got the same views, that they read newspapers which peddle exactly those views, and they grow up with the same sort of prejudices. I long for a world where people question everything.
Well, and it seems like Abdulrazak Gurna has done that, and his views have changed over time, which is interesting. There's a video that's made its way online, and you can see it on the Times website, on the app, of Michael Van Earp, who's got a following online, probably more commonly known as Cycling Mikey. He's sort of a cycling vigilante, I suppose, is how you might describe him, posting videos of dangerous driving, frustrations while cycling. There's a video of him trying to stop a man driving through a no-entry sign, and then he pushes this Fiat 500, sort of drives off, accelerates towards him, trying to get through. He pushes his bike in the way, and this car just smashes through this bike. And it got me thinking, I'm a driver at times, I'm a cyclist, I'm a pedestrian. And whenever I'm one of those, I get annoyed at the other two, despite the fact I am one of the other two at other times. Why do we get so annoyed at each other on the roads?
Well, that's absolutely true. And I tell you why it is. It's because we're frustrated. We want to get from A to B as quickly as possible. Anything that gets in our way or destroys that journey is an absolute nightmare. Van Earp, who's a Dutchman, as you know, he's happy to report celebrities as well if he thinks their driving is dangerous. I've again been researching him. He's basically reported a number of famous faces who've fallen foul of his head cam, including Guy Ritchie and the former boxer Chris Eubank, both of whom he reported to the police. Ritchie was banned from driving for 6 months after being caught texting whilst driving by Van Earp. And Eubank was handed 3 penalty points and a fine for driving past the red light. So he's a sort of vigilante on that sort of basis. But what happened to his bike is actually pretty scary, because if he'd been on that bike, and they need to look at this from a criminal point of view as well, that there's a risk. He could have suffered injury or worse as a result of it. And it's absolutely appalling. I would urge people, go and have a look at the video on the Times site and see exactly what happened. But that frustration when you're behind the wheel, people do become a different animal, if you like. And I think it is that frustration, trying to get from A to B as quickly as possible without anybody interrupting that journey. People who cut in front of you, bicyclists going out of the cycle lanes, it drives people crazy. So you can see why this rage, the road rage erupts.
Yeah, it's like you say, you become a different animal and you do things that you wouldn't do otherwise. And just finally, there's a story in the Times diary section. Ed Balls on a podcast celebrating the diaries of Alan Clark very glowingly. Yes. He says they are funny, reflective and self-defecating. I think he meant self-effacing. And it just got me thinking, you're a broadcaster, Andrew. Have you got any particularly bad on-air slip-ups that you're willing to admit to?
I broadcast on more platforms than Paddington around the world, as you know. What I love, and I've been looking up some of these, Biddy Baxter, who sadly passed away yesterday, she was the editor of Blue Peter, and all of these things, there's all sorts of double entendres, and whenever there's a double entendre, I just want to whip it out, as they say. But on May the 12th, and this was reported widely by the BBC, there was a Blue Peter segment about Durham Cathedral and these antique door knockers, and the presenter, Christopher Wenner, was saying, well, why not go along to the cathedral and see if you can't have a look at the two knockers side by side.
No.
To which Simon Groom sort of said, what a beautiful pair of knockers. And this was, you're working on Biddy Baxter, who was glorious, came sort of coming down and make sure they didn't have this innuendo. But I had one, James Whale, who sadly passed away in the last few days.
Yes, last week.
Basically had the honour of, he used to do a 3-hour show, and I had the honour of filling in for the last couple of hours when he could only do a little bit of that. And we were interviewing one guest who was on a particular programme on Channel 4 to do with Go Back to Where You Came From. And this particular person, Chloe Dobbs, was visiting all sorts of dangerous areas. And Ash, who I did the co-presented the series with, he's sort of talking about, well, you nearly got bombed, he meant to say. But he turned around to her and said, look, I understand you nearly got bummed. Which is a bit unfortunate, an unfortunate vowel movement.
Yes, you've got to be careful what you say, and I'm sorry if that's made you spit out your cereal in the morning. Andrew Eborn, thank you very much. That's the broadcaster, the barrister, the journalist, Andrew Eborn.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.